to the Dr. Max Show, where last week we discussed the secret to pimples. This week we'll be discussing the colon mobility testing, because we all know that we need to take really good care of our colon. The tests that we'll be discussing are radioactive food testing, biopsies, barium enema, and manometry testing. The first test is radioactive food testing. That's where you take food such as scrambled eggs, you add some radioactive isotopes to them and watch them go through the digestive system. You take several x-rays to show the progression of the food through the colon. Here's an x-ray of the radioactive food testing. And if the food stays in one area for a long period of time, then that means that that area has trouble moving the food through the intestine. Some of the pros to this test is there are no side effects. The radioactive isotopes leave the body with the stool, and your body does not absorb any of the radiation from the isotopes. It's not surgical, there's no prep, and you can do the test right now. Some of the cons to the test is it's a long process, and you have to lay still underneath an x-ray for hours. And there's a small exposure to radiation because of the x-rays. The second test is biopsy. A biopsy is a surgical procedure, so you'll need to fast about 24 hours beforehand, get a clean out where you get all the stool out of your colon so that the test's easier to do. You'll have a colonoscopy, and during the colonoscopy, they take several tissue samples throughout the colon, and they look at these tissue samples to see if they have ganglion cells, the cells that make your colon move. Here's a picture of a slide that does have the ganglion cells, and here's one of a slide where they don't have the ganglion cells. The pro to this is that if you do not have the ganglion cells, it's an emergency. You need to get that taken care of pronto, and you'll have to get another surgery to take care of that. However, there's a possibility of internal bleeding. There's surgical complications that come along with just being under anesthesia. You can have ganglion cells and them not work. That is the biggest problem to this test is with mobility. You're not watching the mobility through the test, so you can still have the cells and them just not work. And there's possibility of inflammation. But after this short break, we'll get back to the last two tests. Welcome back. This week we are discussing colon mobility testing. The next procedure we are going to discuss is the barium enema, which is a test that uses x-rays before and after stool excretion to monitor the amount of stool a patient can empty themselves. During this process, a catheter is inserted through the rectum, and the colon is filled with liquid barium, which makes the patient feel like they have to go. After they have emptied all of the liquid barium, they come back for more x-rays to see how much stool is left inside the colon. Like this picture over here, you can tell that there's a lot of stool left inside the colon, which means that the colon was having trouble pushing it out. And here is a picture of a normal barium enema test, where there isn't a lot of stool left inside the colon. Some pros to this test is that it's non-surgical, there's no prep, and you can come in and get it done at any time. Some cons, though, is distension of the intestine, which is basically just inflammation. There is small radiation exposure due to the x-rays. There is possibility for perforation of the colon, which is a rip inside the colon, which would need surgical help to fix. And honestly, it's left to interpretation, like what is a lot of stool left in the intestine compared to not a lot of stool. The last test that we are going to discuss is the manometry test. This is a surgical procedure, so you would need the prep, which is the fasting and the clean out. Then they would insert a catheter with probes, and these probes would be scattered throughout the large intestine that watches and measures the amplitude and duration of colon movement as food is going through the intestine. This picture over here is a picture of a normal manometry test. As you can see where the waves start and where they end. And based on the probes and where they're positioned, you can actually see the food going through the intestine. There is a pattern to this. You can predict and watch it in real time. This picture is one of an abnormal manometry test. As you can see, there's a lot of spikes. There's not really waves. It's very random. There's no pattern to it. So you can predict from this picture that the colon doesn't really know what to do with its movements. It doesn't really know where the food is and what waves it should use to push it through the intestine, meaning you have mobility issues. Some pros to this test is there's no cutting, and you get to watch the colon move in real time. Some cons, though, are the surgical complications that come with just being under anesthesia and any surgical procedure. The space between the probes is not measured. So although where the probes are, they can be acting normal, but between the probes, they could be having complications moving the food through, but you wouldn't know because it's not being measured. However, there is a limit to the amount of probes that can be fit into a catheter. Now, looking at all these tests, as a doctor, I would recommend the radioactive food testing because there's no side effects, no surgery, and no prep. And plus the cons, they're not life-threatening like the surgical complications that come with a manometry test or a biopsy, or even the perforation of the colon that can come with a barium melanoma test. So that's it for colon mobility testing. Next week we'll be discussing how to prevent Alzheimer's. See you next week.